They attacked a disabled woman drinking coffee at the diner. She fell to the ground and no one helped. But 30 minutes later, when the door opened and 3 soldiers walked in, the entire place went silent. Because that woman was their former commander, and no one could dare disrespect her like that. Sarah Martinez had been coming to Murphy's Diner every Tuesday for the past 3 years. Same corner booth, same black coffee, same worn military jacket that she never took off. At 42, she moved through the world differently now, her wheelchair squeaking softly against the checkered linoleum floor, her prosthetic leg hidden beneath faded jeans. The regulars knew her face, but not her story. The waitress, Jenny, would nod respectfully when taking her order. The cook, an old Vietnam vet named Pete, would sometimes catch her eye and give a subtle salute. But most people just saw the wheelchair, the missing leg, and looked away quickly, uncomfortable with what they didn't understand. Sarah preferred it that way. She wasn't here for recognition or pity. She was here because this little diner in small-town Arizona felt normal, safe. A place where she could just exist without the weight of what she'd done, what she'd lost, what she'd become. But today would be different. Today, 3 men in leather vests would walk through that door, and Sarah's carefully constructed quiet life would shatter like glass. She had no idea that across town her former unit was conducting training exercises. She had no idea that Sergeant Mike Rodriguez was grabbing lunch just 2 blocks away. And she definitely had no idea that in exactly 43 minutes, her past would collide with her present in a way that would change everything. The Harley engines roared to life in the parking lot like thunder before a storm. 3 men dismounted their bikes with the swagger of people who'd never been told no in their lives. Tank, Razor, and Snake. Names that sounded tough on leather patches, but felt hollow in the light of day. Tank pushed through the diner's glass door first, his beer gut straining against a Confederate flag t-shirt. His eyes swept the room like a predator marking territory. Behind him, Razor adjusted his scraggly beard and cracked his knuckles, a nervous habit that made him feel dangerous. Snake brought up the rear, younger than the others, with the desperate hunger of someone trying to prove he belonged. "Well, well," Tank's voice boomed across the small space. "Look what we got here, boys." His gaze had landed on Sarah, sitting quietly in her corner booth, a half-finished crossword puzzle spread on the table beside her untouched coffee. She looked up briefly, assessed the threat level with eyes that had seen real danger, then calmly returned to her puzzle. That dismissal, that refusal to be intimidated, lit something ugly in Tank's chest. "Hey, lady," he called out, taking a step closer. "I'm talking to you." The diner went quiet. Jenny froze behind the counter, coffee pot trembling in her hand. Pete peered through the kitchen window, his jaw tightening. 2 college students in the opposite booth suddenly found their phones very interesting. Sarah still didn't look up. She'd learned long ago that engaging with bullies only fed their hunger. But what she didn't know was that Tank had been drinking since noon. What she didn't know was that he'd just been fired from his construction job. What she didn't know was that he was looking for someone, anyone, to make pay for his failures. And in her wheelchair, in her silence, in her refusal to acknowledge his existence, Tank found the perfect target. "You deaf or just rude?" Tank's voice rose, drawing stares from every corner of the diner. He moved closer to Sarah's table, his heavy boots thudding against the floor like a countdown to disaster. Sarah finally looked up, her expression calm but alert. 20 years in the military had taught her to read situations quickly. 3 men clearly intoxicated, looking for trouble. Civilian location, multiple bystanders, limited exit routes. Her tactical mind cataloged everything in seconds. "Is there something you need?" she asked quietly, her voice steady and professional. Tank laughed, a harsh sound that made Jenny wince behind the counter. "Yeah, I need you to learn some respect. When someone's talking to you, you answer." "I did answer," Sarah replied simply. That's when Razor stepped forward, emboldened by his leader's aggression. "Look at this, Tank. Military jacket, but sitting in a wheelchair. Bet she's one of those fake veterans looking for sympathy and free handouts. The insult hit harder than any physical blow could have. Sarah's hand tightened on her coffee cup, but her expression remained neutral. She'd heard it before. The assumptions, the doubts, the cruel suggestions that her service wasn't real because she was a woman, because she was disabled, because she didn't fit their narrow definition of what a soldier should look like. "Why don't you boys just order your food and let everyone eat in peace?" she suggested, her tone still calm, but with an edge that anyone with military experience would recognize as a warning. Snake, desperate to impress his friends, chose that moment to prove his worth. He reached over and flicked Sarah's military jacket. "This even real, or did you buy it at a thrift store?" That's when something shifted in Sarah's eyes. Not anger. Anger was messy, uncontrolled. This was something colder, more dangerous. This was the look of someone who had commanded respect in places where respect meant survival. But before she could respond, Tank made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. It happened fast. Tank, fueled by alcohol and wounded pride, reached down and grabbed the handles of Sarah's wheelchair. "Maybe you'll show some respect when you're looking up at me," he snarled and yanked. The chair tilted backward violently. Sarah, caught off guard by the suddenness of the attack, couldn't brace herself. She tumbled to the floor hard, her prosthetic leg twisting awkwardly as she hit the linoleum. Her coffee cup shattered against the table edge, sending hot liquid and ceramic shards across the floor. The diner erupted in gasps and shocked murmurs, but no one moved. Not Jenny, frozen behind the counter, not the college students filming on their phones but too scared to intervene, not the elderly couple in the corner whispering anxiously but staying firmly in their seats. Sarah lay on the floor for a moment, assessing damage. Her shoulder ached where she'd hit the ground. Her prosthetic had partially detached, sending sharp pain up her residual limb. But worse than the physical pain was the humiliation, the feeling of being helpless while strangers watched and did nothing. Tank loomed over her, his face flushed with satisfaction. "There we go, now you know your place." Razor and Snake laughed nervously, suddenly uncomfortable with how far things had gone, but too cowardly to speak up. Around the diner, people averted their eyes, as if looking away could somehow undo what they'd witnessed. Sarah began the slow, painful process of getting back into her chair. Her training kicked in. Maintain dignity, assess the situation, don't escalate unless absolutely necessary. But as she struggled with her twisted prosthetic, as she felt the weight of everyone's stares and silence, something else kicked in too. 23 years of military service, 4 tours of duty, a Purple Heart earned pulling 3 soldiers out of a burning Humvee in Fallujah. And these 3 cowards thought they could humiliate her because she was in a wheelchair? What they didn't know, what nobody in that diner knew except Pete, who was already reaching for his phone in the kitchen, was that Sarah Martinez wasn't just any veteran. She was Captain Sarah Martinez, former commanding officer of the 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, and her unit was about to learn what had happened to their beloved commander. In the kitchen, Pete's hands shook as he dialed a number he'd memorized but hoped never to use. At 68, the old Vietnam vet had seen enough injustice in his life to know when it was time to act. "Charlie Base, this is Pete Garrison," he whispered into the phone, watching through the service window as Sarah finally managed to right her wheelchair and climb back into it. "I need to report an assault on one of ours." The voice on the other end sharpened immediately. "Location and details, Pete." "Murphy's Diner, Highway 87. Captain Martinez. They knocked her down, Pete. 3 bikers. She's..." His voice cracked. "She's trying to clean up the mess alone and nobody's helping her." A pause. Then, "We're 20 minutes out. Keep eyes on the situation." Pete hung up and returned to the window. Sarah had managed to get most of the ceramic pieces into a napkin, but her hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear, he realized, but from rage she was fighting to control. Meanwhile, Tank had settled into a booth with his friends, basking in what he thought was victory. They ordered burgers and beer, talking loudly about showing respect and knowing your place. Every few minutes, Tank would glance over at Sarah and smirk, pleased with himself. What Tank didn't see was the way Pete caught Sarah's eye and nodded once, a veteran's signal that help was coming. What he didn't see was Jenny quietly locking the front door and flipping the sign to closed. What he definitely didn't see was the black SUV that had just pulled into the parking lot across the street, or the three figures in tactical gear who stepped out and began moving toward the diner with purpose. But Sarah saw. And for the first time since hitting the floor, she allowed herself a small, cold smile. Because Tank and his friends were about to learn the difference between picking on a helpless woman and disrespecting a United States Army Ranger. The rumble started low, like distant thunder. Then it grew louder, more distinct, the unmistakable sound of military vehicles approaching. Through the diner's windows, people could see them now. Two black SUVs with government plates, moving in perfect formation down Highway 87. Tank looked up from his burger, a frown creasing his forehead. Hell's all that noise? His question was answered when the vehicles pulled into Murphy's parking lot with tactical precision. Doors opened simultaneously, and three figures stepped out. Even from a distance, their bearing was unmistakable. Military, active duty, and absolutely focused. In the diner, Sarah straightened in her wheelchair. She recognized that walk, that formation, that particular brand of controlled urgency. Her unit, her boys, and they looked pissed. The lead figure approached the diner's glass door and knocked once. Sharp, authoritative. Jenny looked to Pete, who nodded, and she unlocked the door with trembling fingers. Sergeant First Class Mike Rodriguez entered first, his dress uniform immaculate, his expression carved from stone. Behind him came Staff Sergeant James Wilson and Corporal Danny Torres, Sarah's former squad, now grown men with families and responsibilities, but still bound by the unbreakable loyalty forged in combat. The diner fell absolutely silent. Even Tank's laughter died in his throat as three sets of combat-hardened eyes swept the room, instantly cataloging threats, exits, and the positioning of every person present. Rodriguez's gaze found Sarah first, taking in her disheveled appearance, the coffee stains on her jacket, the ceramic shards still scattered near her table. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then his eyes moved to Tank, to Razor, to Snake, three men who suddenly looked very small in their leather vests and fake tough guy poses. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said, moving to Sarah's table and standing at attention. "Are you injured?" The formality, the respect, the instant recognition of her rank despite her civilian clothes. It hit Sarah like a physical force. For the first time in 3 years, someone was seeing her not as a disabled woman to be pitied or ignored, but as the soldier she'd always been. "I'm fine, Sergeant," she replied, her voice steady now, command authority creeping back into her tone. But Rodriguez wasn't fine. None of them were. Because what Tank and his friends had just learned was that they hadn't humiliated some random disabled woman. They had assaulted Captain Sarah Martinez, recipient of the Purple Heart, Bronze Star with Valor, and the undying loyalty of every soldier who'd ever served under her command. Wilson stepped forward, his eyes locked on Tank like a laser sight finding its target. "Which one of you put your hands on our captain?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fired weapon. Tank's face went pale, his swagger evaporating as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Razor and Snake suddenly found the table very interesting, their earlier bravado replaced by the dawning recognition that they had made a catastrophic mistake. "Captain?" Tank's voice cracked slightly. She's just some." "She's Captain Sarah Martinez," Torres interrupted, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd learned respect the hard way. "2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. She pulled 3 men out of a burning vehicle under enemy fire in Fallujah. One of those men was me." The words hit the diner like a physical force. Jenny covered her mouth with her hands. The college students stopped filming, suddenly aware they were witnessing something far more serious than a simple confrontation. Even Pete emerged from the kitchen, standing at attention despite his civilian clothes. Sarah remained seated, watching the scene unfold with the calm assessment of someone who'd commanded soldiers in life-and-death situations. Part of her wanted to de-escalate, to handle this quietly, but another part The part that had been pushed down and dismissed for 3 long years was finally being seen again. Rodriguez never took his eyes off Tank. "Sir, I'm going to ask you once more. Did you assault this officer?" Tank's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The word officer seemed to echo in his head, redefining everything he thought he knew about the woman he'd humiliated. This wasn't just some disabled veteran looking for sympathy. This was a decorated army captain who had commanded respect in the world's most elite fighting force. We didn't know," Tank stammered. "Didn't know what?" Wilson stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Didn't know she was human? Didn't know she deserved basic respect? Or didn't know she was the kind of soldier who would die for strangers like you without thinking twice?" The silence stretched taut as a tripwire. Sarah could feel the tension building, could see her former soldiers struggling between their loyalty to her and their duty to maintain discipline. This was the moment that would define not just this confrontation, but how everyone in this room would remember what it meant to serve, to sacrifice, and to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. And Tank was about to learn that some mistakes can't be undone with apologies. Sarah raised her hand slightly, a small gesture that immediately commanded the attention of every soldier in the room. 20 years of command authority wasn't something that disappeared just because you changed into civilian clothes. "At ease," she said quietly, and Rodriguez, Wilson, and Torres immediately shifted their stances, still alert but no longer coiled for action. She looked directly at Tank, who was now sweating despite the diner's air conditioning. "You want to know who I am? Fine. I'm the woman who spent 4 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm the officer who held together a unit when mortar rounds were falling like rain. I'm the soldier who lost her leg pulling Corporal Torres out of an IED blast, and I'd do it again without hesitation." Her voice remained calm, but each word hit like a hammer blow. Around the diner, people leaned forward, hanging on every syllable. "But you know what I'm not," Sarah continued, her eyes never leaving Tank's face. "I'm not someone who needs to prove her worth by intimidating others. I'm not someone who finds strength in making others feel weak. And I'm certainly not someone who would ever use my position to humiliate another human being the way you just did." Tank's leather-clad bravado crumbled completely. The Confederate flag on his shirt suddenly felt like a spotlight highlighting his shame. Razor and Snake had gone completely silent, their faces flushed with embarrassment. Rodriguez stepped forward again. "Ma'am, what are your orders?" It was a simple question that carried enormous weight. Sarah could order these men to do almost anything, and they would follow without question. She could have Tank arrested for assault. She could have him publicly humiliated in return. She could use her position and their loyalty to extract any revenge she wanted. Instead, she did something that nobody in that diner expected. "Sergeant, I want you to help Mr." She looked at Tank expectantly. "Thompson," he mumbled. "Tank Thompson. I want you to help Mr. Thompson understand what service actually means. Not the uniform, not the rank, not the respect that comes with it, but the responsibility, the duty to protect those who can't protect themselves." She paused, letting the words sink in. Because anyone can knock someone down, it takes a real soldier to help them back up. The challenge hung in the air like a dare. Tank looked around the diner, at the faces staring back at him, at the soldiers waiting to see what he would do, at Sarah sitting calmly in her wheelchair, offering him something he didn't deserve and had never expected, a chance at redemption. What happened next would determine not just Tank's fate, but the kind of man he chose to be. Tank Thompson stood frozen in that moment, between who he had been and who he might become. The diner held its collective breath as he looked down at Sarah, then at the soldiers flanking her, then at his own reflection in the chrome napkin dispenser, a middle-aged man in leather and denim, face flushed with shame and alcohol, trembling under the weight of his own actions. He started, then stopped. His voice, when he found it again, was barely above a whisper. "I didn't know." "No," Sarah replied evenly. "You didn't want to know. There's a difference." Tank's knees buckled slightly and he sat down hard in the nearest booth. Razor and Snake watched their leader crumble, their own certainties dissolving like sugar in rain. "Ma'am," Tank said, the word foreign on his tongue, but somehow necessary. God, what have I done?" Sarah studied his face, looking for the telltale signs of manipulation, a fake remorse designed to escape consequences. But what she saw was genuine horror, a man suddenly confronted with the true weight of his actions. "You knocked down a disabled woman because you thought she couldn't fight back," she said simply. "You humiliated someone in front of a room full of people because it made you feel powerful. You turned your anger at the world into cruelty toward a stranger." Each statement hit Tank like a physical blow. Around the diner, people shifted uncomfortably, some recognizing their own moments of weakness, their own failures to act when action was needed. "But," Sarah continued, and that single word carried the weight of possibility, "you can choose what happens next." Rodriguez, Wilson, and Torres exchanged glances. They knew their captain well enough to recognize when she was teaching a lesson that went far beyond military tactics. Tank looked up, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. How do I fix this?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering. Outside, the Arizona sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the diner's windows. The day that had started with routine and silence was ending with truth and choice. "Stand up," she said finally. Tank rose on unsteady legs, his massive frame somehow diminished by shame. "Now," Sarah said, "help me clean up the mess you made." It was such a simple request, but in that moment it carried the weight of redemption. Tank looked at the scattered ceramic pieces, the coffee stains, the overturned napkin holder, the physical evidence of his cruelty, and slowly, carefully, he knelt down and began picking up the pieces. And in that act of service, witnessed by soldiers and civilians alike, something fundamental shifted in Murphy's diner. Tank's hand shook as he carefully picked up each piece of broken ceramic, placing them gently in a napkin. Sarah watched silently, her trained eye noting the way he moved, not with the swagger of earlier, but with the careful deliberation of someone handling something precious that had been broken. Razor and Snake sat frozen in their booth, watching their leader on his knees, cleaning up his own mess. The power dynamic that had seemed so certain moments before had completely reversed. "The coffee, too," Sarah said quietly. Tank nodded, grabbing paper towels from Jenny's outstretched hand. As he mopped up the spilled coffee, Sarah began to speak again, her voice carrying across the hushed diner. "In Fallujah, we had a saying, you break it, you fix it, you own it. Not just equipment, but trust, relationships, the bond between soldiers who depend on each other to come home alive." Tank paused in his cleaning, listening. "When I lost my leg pulling Torres out of that burning Humvee, I could have been angry, could have blamed the military, blamed God, blamed the world for putting me in that situation. Instead, I chose to own what happened next, to take that experience and use it to be better, not bitter." She looked directly at him. "Right now, you have the same choice." Tank finished cleaning and slowly stood, the wet paper towels in his hands like evidence of his transformation. What should I do?" Rodriguez stepped forward, his voice softer now but still carrying authority. "You start by understanding what you just witnessed. Captain Martinez didn't have to offer you redemption. Most people wouldn't have. But that's what real strength looks like. Not tearing others down, but lifting them up." Wilson nodded. "She taught us that the measure of a soldier isn't in how hard they can hit, but in how they treat those who can't hit back." Torres, the man Sarah had saved, spoke last. "She lost her leg saving my life. Never complained, never asked for special treatment, never used her sacrifice as an excuse to be cruel to others. That's honor." Tank looked around the diner, seeing it differently now. Jenny behind the counter, no longer cowering but standing tall. Pete in the kitchen doorway, proud and respectful. The college students, their phones forgotten, watching a lesson in humanity unfold. "I want to learn," Tank said finally, his voice stronger now. "I want to be better than what I was when I walked in here." Sarah nodded slowly. "Then you will be." But the real transformation was just beginning, and it would require more than words to prove that change was possible. Sarah reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small card, worn from years of carrying. She held it out to Tank, who took it with reverence as if handling something sacred. "That's the address of the VA hospital where I volunteer," she said. "Every Tuesday and Thursday, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. They need people to push wheelchairs, read to patients, help with physical therapy. Nothing glamorous, nothing that will make you feel like a hero, just service." Tank studied the card, his thick fingers tracing the edges. You trust me around other veterans after what I did?" "I'm giving you the chance to earn that trust," Sarah replied. "But understand this, if you show up to serve, not to feel better about yourself. These are men and women who gave everything for their country. They deserve respect, not your guilt." Razor finally found his voice. "What about us?" Sarah looked at Tank's two companions, seeing past their leather vests to the insecurity and lost purpose underneath. "Same offer, but you all come together or none of you come at all. Real change doesn't happen alone." Rodriguez stepped closer to Tank. "Sir, I want to be clear about something. What happened here today won't be forgotten, but it also won't be reported. As long as you follow through, Captain Martinez is offering you something that the Army doesn't give. A second chance without consequences. Don't waste it." Tank nodded vigorously. "I won't. I swear, I won't." "Swearing is easy," Wilson interjected. "Showing up when it's hard, when you don't feel like it, when no one's watching, that's when your word means something." Jenny approached hesitantly from behind the counter. "Ma'am," she said to Sarah, I should have helped you. When they knocked you down, I should have said something, done something. I'm ashamed." Sarah's expression softened. "Fear makes cowards of us all sometimes, Jenny. What matters is what you do next time." The young waitress nodded, tears in her eyes. "There won't be a next time, not in my diner." Pete emerged fully from the kitchen, his old Vietnam veteran's cap in his hands. "Captain, it's been an honor having you in our establishment. You've given this place something it didn't have before." "What's that?" Sarah asked. Pete smiled, putting his cap back on with military precision. "Purpose." Around the diner, something had shifted permanently. The college students were putting away their phones, really looking at each other for the first time. The elderly couple was holding hands across their table. Even the atmosphere felt different, charged with possibility instead of tension. But the real test was yet to come. Because promises made in moments of crisis are easy to break when the spotlight fades. 3 months later, Murphy's Diner looked the same but felt completely different. The corner booth where Sarah had been humiliated now bore a small plaque, reserved for those who served. Not flashy, not asking for attention, just a quiet acknowledgement of respect. Sarah still came every Tuesday, but now she wasn't alone. Tank Thompson sat across from her, no longer wearing leather vests, but simple work clothes, his massive hands gentle as he helped elderly veterans with their coffee. Razor and Snake flanked other tables, their former aggression transformed into protective watchfulness over those who needed assistance. The transformation hadn't been easy. Tank had shown up to the VA that first Tuesday hungover and resentful, expecting to put in minimum effort for maximum redemption. He'd lasted exactly 2 hours before storming out, overwhelmed by the weight of real sacrifice he witnessed in the hospital corridors. But Sarah had been waiting in the parking lot. "Quit?" she'd asked simply. "It's too hard," Tank had admitted. "Seeing what they've lost, what they've given up, it makes what I did to you seem even worse." "Good," Sarah had replied. "That means you're finally understanding the cost of service. Come back tomorrow." And he had, and the next day, and the next. Now, Rodriguez visited the diner monthly, always in dress uniform, always bringing stories of the unit's current missions. Wilson had moved his family to town, opened a small auto repair shop that employed 3 veterans. Torres had married Jenny the waitress, their wedding reception held right there in Murphy's, with Tank and his friends serving food to the guests. But the real change was deeper than employment or marriages or community service. It was in the way people looked at each other now, the way conversation started instead of ending when someone walked in wearing a uniform or using a wheelchair. Sarah pushed herself away from her usual table and rolled toward the door, her volunteer shift at the VA starting in 20 minutes. Tank stood immediately, grabbing his jacket. "Ready, Captain?" She smiled, not the careful, guarded expression she'd worn for years, but something genuine and warm. "Ready, Sergeant." It had taken 3 months, but Tank had earned that title through service, through showing up, through proving that people could change if they chose to do the hard work of becoming better. As they left Murphy's Diner together, the disabled veteran and the reformed bully, the officer and the enlisted man, the teacher and the student, Pete watched from behind the counter and smiled. Because sometimes he thought, sometimes people surprise you. Sometimes the worst day becomes the beginning of the best change. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get to witness the moment when someone chooses to become who they were meant to be all along. The diner door closed behind them with a soft chime, and the afternoon light streamed through the windows, illuminating the small plaque in the corner booth. Reserved for those who served. All of them, in their own way, had served. All of them, in their own way, had been transformed. And that, Pete knew, was what real honor looked like. If you believe that everyone deserves a second chance to serve with honor, type respect in the comments and subscribe for more stories about the heroes among us, both the ones who wear uniforms and the ones who choose to become better.